Ever been fined by your HOA for something you didn't expect? Well, imagine being hit with a fine for hunting, and instead of backing down, you take matters into your own hands. That's exactly what happened to me. In today's story, going to share how I took control of the situation, bought the land I used for hiking, and did something no one could have predicted. I shut it down forever. This is a story of standing up, making bold moves, and showing how one small action can change everything. Stick around, you're not going to want to miss this one. And hey, if you enjoy the ride, hit that subscribe button. We've got another shocking story coming tomorrow. Hunting. It's something I've been doing for years. The fresh air, the thrill of the chase, the quiet solitude. There's nothing quite like it. Every weekend, without fail, I'd head out to my favorite spot. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small patch of land on the outskirts of town, near the hiking trail that the locals loved to stroll through. A perfect mix of thick woods and open fields, perfect for spotting deer, rabbits, and the occasional wild turkey. But, of course, there was one little issue: that land. It was owned by the local HOA, the very same group that managed the neighborhood where I lived. I knew it wasn't technically my land, but there was a bit of a gray area. The HOA had given permission for people to use it for recreational purposes, hiking, biking, that sort of thing. It had always been a quiet, mostly forgotten corner of town. Not many people went up there, which meant I could hunt without too much hassle. Besides, what harm was I really doing? It was just me, nature, and my rifle. What could possibly go wrong? Well, one fateful morning, I found out exactly what could go wrong. I'd just bagged a nice buck and was hauling it back to my truck when I spotted the envelope. It was wedged in the crack of my truck door, with an official-looking HOA logo stamped across it. I opened it, figuring it was just some routine paperwork, maybe an updated community newsletter. But no, this was not a newsletter, a fine. A $500 fine for hunting on prohibited land. Apparently, the HOA had decided that no hunting was allowed on their precious little patch of wilderness. They didn't exactly send me a heads up about this new rule. In fact, it was the first time I'd ever heard of it. The letter also mentioned that if I did it again, the fine would double, and I could even face legal consequences. Legal consequences? I stood there for a second, staring at the letter like it was some cruel joke. I was this close to throwing the thing into the wind and walking away. But then it hit me. I wasn't just mad, I was irked. Here I was, trying to enjoy a peaceful weekend with some outdoor solitude. And this HOA, this tiny group of people, were trying to tell me how to live my life. It didn't sit right with me. I wasn't some rogue outlaw hunting in the middle of the city. I was a responsible, law-abiding citizen who had been quietly enjoying nature without bothering anyone. So, what was I supposed to do? Just roll over and take it? No, that wasn't going to happen. I looked at that fine again, my mind racing. Maybe it was a typo. Maybe they had made a mistake. But even if they hadn't, it didn't matter. I wasn't going to let some HOA dictate how I spent my weekends. There had to be a way to fight this, to make a point. If they thought they could fine me for doing something as harmless as hunting, then I was going to show them just how wrong they were. But then I had a thought. What if I didn't just fight back? What if I did something bigger? Something that would send a message not just to the HOA, but to everyone in town. What if I could take control of the situation in a way they never saw coming? What if I could flip the script and turn the tables? I knew I had options. And, as I stood there, thinking about how I could turn this ridiculous fine into an opportunity, the plan began to take shape. I would buy the land, all of it. I'd buy the land the HOA controlled, the land they thought they could use to boss people around, and I'd take it off their hands permanently. And then, I'd close it off. No more hikers. No more people walking their dogs. I'd make it clear that this was my land now, and the rules, they'd be mine to make. And that's when I realized I had just started something much bigger than a simple hunt. This wasn't just about avoiding a fine anymore. It was about showing the HOA who was really in control. It was time to fight back, and I wasn't going to back down. Asterisk. After receiving that absurd fine, I knew I couldn't just sit around and sulk. I had to do something. But what? I wasn't about to pay the fine. That much was clear. Not without a fight. So, what was the play? How could I turn this mess into something worthwhile? Well, here's the thing. I wasn't just some random guy with a rifle. I was someone who had been quietly using that land for years. And it wasn't just for hunting. I loved that place. It was a refuge. Sure, the locals used it for hiking, but it was a mostly ignored stretch of land until the HOA decided it was their playground. So why not flip this whole situation on its head and make it mine? I knew I needed to figure out exactly what I was dealing with before diving into anything. First, I did what anyone would do when they're not sure what's going on. I Googled it. I started looking up the HOA. Land. Anything I could find. Turns out, the land was part of a much bigger plot of land owned by the HOA. Now, I wasn't a land expert by any means, but I knew enough to recognize opportunity when I saw it. This wasn't some precious national park that couldn't be touched. This was land that had been casually tossed around by bureaucrats who'd clearly never set foot in the place. After some more digging, I found out the land wasn't even prime hiking territory. It wasn't some scenic trail with breathtaking views. It was a random stretch of woods that people used because, well, it was there. The hiking wasn't anything special. I'm not sure the HOA even realized what they had, which made me all the more determined to make it mine. I figured, why let the HOA control something they didn't even care about? It was my land now. I'd just buy it. Simple as that. At first, it sounded like a crazy idea, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I could not only get back at them for fining me, but I could take control of the land for good. No more fines, no more rules, just me and the woods. But buying land, that wasn't something I could just do in an afternoon, obviously. So, I had to make a move. I called up a real estate agent, someone who had dealt with HOA lands before. The conversation started with a few awkward pleasantries, but once I dropped the "I'm thinking about buying the land the HOA owns" bomb, the mood shifted. Turns out, the agent didn't seem too shocked. This kind of thing wasn't unheard of, though it was rare. It was like I was the guy who'd just discovered a hidden treasure that no one else had bothered to look for. The agent pulled up some paperwork, showing the land's value and ownership details. It wasn't too expensive, definitely within my reach. I didn't want to buy the whole shebang, just the part that was closest to the hiking trail. It wasn't a massive tract of land, but it was enough for me to stake my claim. I could already picture it. The no trespassing signs, the land that would be mine to do with as I pleased. The negotiation wasn't easy. The HOA wasn't thrilled about the idea of selling, especially not to someone who'd been flaunting their rules. But that was the thing. They had no idea what they were getting into. I wasn't just some guy who wanted to hunt in peace. I was about to flip the tables, take the land off their hands, and shut it down for good. We went back and forth for a few weeks. There were talks of price increases and contract revisions, but I was patient. I knew this was the only way to truly get what I wanted, and in the end, they caved. They gave in. I closed the deal. The land was officially mine. As the ink dried on the contract, I could feel the weight of the decision settle in. I wasn't just buying a piece of land. I was making a statement. I had made a move that no one had expected. The HOA had tried to find me for hunting, and now I had turned the tables completely. I stood there, holding the deed to my new land, and smiled. It wasn't about getting revenge. It was about taking control. I wasn't just some guy with a rifle anymore. I was the one who made the rules now, and no one was going to take that away from me. When I first set out to buy the land, I figured it would be a relatively straightforward deal. You know, a few phone calls, some paperwork, maybe a little haggling, and boom, I'd own a piece of property. What I didn't anticipate was how much drama the HOA would bring to the table. It started innocently enough. After weeks of back with my real estate agent, we finally got in touch with the HOA's representative. The first conversation. Classic bureaucratic red tape. They acted like they were doing me a favor just by answering the phone. I was polite at first, laid out my intentions, and let them know I was interested in purchasing the land. But the second I mentioned that it was the exact same land they had fined me for hunting on, things took a turn. Suddenly, the tone shifted. I was no longer the nice guy who just wants to buy some land in their eyes. I was the guy who had dared to defy their rules. The rep started asking questions I didn't have answers to, like why I wanted the land and what my plans were, as if I needed their permission for my plans. That's when I decided to play it smart. Instead of answering their questions directly, I kept repeating, "I'm just interested in buying the land. We can discuss the details later." The silence on the other end was deafening. You could practically hear the wheels turning in their heads. They weren't used to this kind of resistance. I was starting to enjoy it, but just when I thought things couldn't get more ridiculous, the HOA called a special meeting to discuss the sale of their land to me. A special meeting? Seriously? It was starting to feel like I was negotiating with a group of toddlers, but instead of candy, they were holding on to their land like it was a rare Pac-Man card. The back-and-forth meetings dragged on for weeks. There was some pushback on the price. The HOA had originally set a high asking price, probably assuming I'd back down, but I wasn't about to cave. I wasn't just buying this land to have a pretty patch of earth to hunt on. I was buying it to flip the script on them. Every conversation felt like a chess match. They'd throw an offer at me, and I'd either counter or ignore it completely. It got heated at times, with one of the HOA members practically frothing at the mouth when I rejected their terms. I wasn't bothered by their tantrums. In fact, I relished the drama. They wanted to maintain control, but I was determined to make this deal mine. With each offer, I dropped the price, made them reconsider their position, and, eventually, they realized they were in over their heads. At long last, the deal was done. We shook hands, or rather, signed contracts, and just like that, I was the proud owner of land that had once been part of the HOA's little empire. The sense of accomplishment hit me like a ton of bricks, but then came the reality check. I now owned a piece of land with a lot of trees, some wild animals, and a whole lot of responsibility. It wasn't just about hunting anymore. I was the one who called the shots. I didn't waste time after the paperwork was signed. The very next day, I headed over to the land with a few signs I had printed out. Bold red letters screamed "Trail Closed" in big, obnoxious font. I hammered them into the ground like a man marking his territory. This land wasn't just mine to hunt on anymore. It was mine to control. I couldn't wait to see the reaction from the hikers. I almost laughed at how easy it had been to make my point. The hikers had no idea what was coming. For years, they'd just walked in and out, thinking it was theirs to use. But no more. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered, "You sure about this?" Sure, I was messing with the status quo, but honestly, it felt damn good. With the signs in place, and the land officially closed off, I took a step back and surveyed my new kingdom. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about the fine anymore. It was about asserting control in a way I hadn't been able to before. The HOA had thought they could fine me, but I was the one who had the last laugh. Now, the land was mine, and it wasn't going anywhere. It didn't take long for word to spread. I knew it would get out eventually. After all, people talk. But even I was surprised by how fast the news traveled. The local hiking community, the one that used the land for their weekend strolls and dog walks, was in an uproar. I mean, who could blame them? One day they were enjoying their little slice of nature, and the next, it was off limits. The first person to show up was an older guy who looked like he'd been hiking since the days when people still used compasses instead of smartphones. He was angry, and I could tell from the moment I opened the door. His face was red, his hands waving in the air like he was trying to fly. He wasn't alone, either. Behind him, there were more people, mostly locals who had spent years taking advantage of the space I now controlled. They all had the same question. Why? Why did you do this? One of them asked, clearly more hurt than anything else. This land has been open to us for years. We've never had a problem with it. Why close it now? I could feel their eyes boring into me, the weight of their expectations pressing down. And to be honest, I didn't have a good answer. At least not the answer they wanted to hear. Sure, I could have explained the fine, or the HOA's overreach, or even the fact that I now had the right to do whatever I wanted with the land. But none of that would have satisfied them. They didn't care about my rights or my intentions. They cared about their weekend hikes. As the days passed, more and more people showed up. Some were angry, others just confused. But there was one thing they all had in common. They didn't understand why I had shut it down. I had become the villain in their story, the guy who ruined their quiet little piece of nature. I wasn't some hero who'd fought the system. I was a guy who made a selfish move. And as much as it hurt to admit, I started to wonder if they were right. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and thought, you know what? I'm going to ruin everyone's weekend. No, it wasn't about them. It was about me. It was about taking control of something I had no right to control, just to prove that I could. But here's the kicker. Now that I had control, I didn't feel any better. I wasn't winning some grand moral victory. I was just a guy who closed off a piece of land and pissed a lot of people off in the process. At night, when I sat down to think about it, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that maybe I'd gone too far. Sure, the fine had been the initial spark, but was that really why I did this? Or had I just wanted to make a point? The more I reflected, the more I realized that it wasn't about hunting. It wasn't even about the fine anymore. It was about showing the HOA and everyone else that I wasn't just going to take their nonsense lying down. I wasn't just some guy getting bullied into submission. I was in control now, but control comes with a cost, and I was starting to see that. The community's anger didn't just affect my reputation. It made me question my own motivations. I wasn't an innocent bystander in this story anymore. I was the one who decided the fate of that land, and with that decision came a responsibility I hadn't fully understood before. I wasn't just messing with an HOA or making a political statement. I was messing with the people who had called that land their own for years. The land that had once been a refuge for me, a place where I went to escape the chaos of life, was now a symbol of conflict, and that felt heavier than any fine ever could. But here's the thing. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. I'd already made my decision, and no amount of angry hikers was going to change that. As the criticisms piled up, I became more resolute. What I'd done wasn't just about getting back at the HOA or making a point to the community. It was about asserting my ownership, about making a statement that I was the one who called the shots here. The land, the rules, the boundaries. They were all mine. It wasn't about being right. It wasn't about revenge. It was about taking control in a way that no one expected, least of all the HOA and the people who had grown used to thinking the land was theirs. So, while the backlash was difficult, it didn't change my mind. I'd made my choice, and it was a choice I stood behind. In the end, I realized that sometimes the price of control isn't just about money or property. Sometimes it's about standing firm when everyone else is pushing you to back down. And yeah, maybe I was a little bit of a villain in their eyes, but at least I was the one writing the story now. and that, in its own twisted way, felt pretty damn good. The days that followed the land's closure felt like a strange mix of liberation and isolation. I had done it. I had made my point. The land, once shared by the hikers and hunters alike, was now under my full control. The no trespassing signs dotted the entrance and along the perimeter, a constant reminder of the bold move I had made. The air felt different when I walked on it now, not as a visitor, but as the absolute owner. It was both empowering and a bit unnerving at first. There was an almost surreal satisfaction in knowing that I was in charge. The HOA had underestimated me. They thought they could find me, make me back down, but instead, I had taken their land and turned it into something they no longer had a say in. It felt like victory, but it wasn't a traditional kind of win. There were no cheers, no applause. There was just the silent weight of what I had done, and the realization that this was now permanent. Word spread quickly about what I had done. People in the town talked. I became a kind of legend. Some saw me as a hero, the guy who stood up against the HOA. Others saw me as the villain who shut down their beloved hiking spot. I didn't care, honestly. At that moment, the opinions of others didn't matter. What mattered was that I had made my mark. I had taken control of something that, up until that point, had been out of my reach. But as the weeks passed, something unexpected started to sink in. While I had taken control, I realized that control wasn't always what it was cracked up to be. The more I thought about it, the more I saw the cracks in my reasoning. I had wanted to take a stand against the HOA to prove that I wouldn't be bullied into submission. But did I really need to shut down the whole land? Did I need to take it away from everyone who had come to rely on it for their own sense of peace and escape? Sure, the land had been a hunting spot for me, but it had also been something else for others. It had been a place where people found solace, where families took their dogs for a walk, where retirees could stretch their legs and take in the natural world around them. In my quest for control, I had inadvertently taken that away from them. I wasn't blind to the backlash, though. People had a right to be upset. I had received my share of angry emails and even a few harsh letters. The hikers, the people who'd been coming there for years, had every right to feel betrayed. In my effort to make a bold statement, I had disrupted their routine, their slice of nature. It was hard to ignore the anger, but it was also hard to ignore the small, quieter moments. When I saw people looking at the closed signs, shaking their heads. But here's the thing, that was the price of my decision. Sometimes, when you take control, when you challenge something bigger than you don't get to pick and choose what parts of the outcome you'll accept. It wasn't just about me asserting my rights anymore. It was about accepting that I had changed things for good. There was no turning back. The HOA, well, they were as quiet as a mouse after I made my move. They didn't send any follow-up letters, didn't try to fight the closure in court. They knew they couldn't win. What were they going to say? That I wasn't allowed to buy the land they owned? No, they had to sit there, grumbling, knowing that they had lost their foothold. They had underestimated me, and in the end, they paid the price for it. As time went on, I began to understand something important. The HOA wasn't my real enemy. It wasn't the fine. It wasn't even the land. It was the feeling of powerlessness. I had felt helpless when they first slapped me with that fine, and in my quest to take control, I had overacted. I wanted to show the world that I wasn't going to be pushed around anymore, but I had to ask myself, was this really the right way to do it? When I look back now, it's clear that this wasn't just about the fine. It wasn't about hunting or the HOA. It was about something deeper. It was about standing up for yourself, making sure that no one could take what was yours, but also about recognizing that with power comes responsibility. I had learned that the hard way, so what did I learn from all this? For one, I learned that control is a double-edged sword. It feels good in the moment, but it comes with consequences. The land was mine, but in taking it, I had to live with the fact that others had lost something they valued, and in a way, I had to. The peaceful hunting grounds I'd once enjoyed had become a battleground, a place where my actions had caused more harm than good. The larger lesson? Sometimes, standing up for yourself doesn't mean you have to bulldoze through everything in your path. Sometimes, it's about setting boundaries and then respecting those of others. Sure, I had taken control of the land, but I hadn't thought about the community that had existed there long before I made my move. I had acted without thinking of the bigger picture, but that's what growth is, right? Recognizing that your actions, even the boldest ones, come with ripple effects. They shape not only your future, but the futures of those around you. And while I wouldn't take back the decision to stand up to the HOA, I also know that in my quest for control, I had lost something too. The land, once a refuge, had become a symbol of division. I had to live with that. In the end, maybe that's the real takeaway. It's not about winning or losing, or even about who's right or wrong. It's about learning that power doesn't just come from asserting your rights. It comes from understanding the consequences of those rights, and realizing that sometimes, the best thing you can do is step back and let others share in what you fought so hard to take. Because true control doesn't mean owning everything. It means knowing when to let go,